Peter Hitchens, where do you stand on all this?
I stand laughing at one side of it. What is in this for any normal human being? People have asked me over the past few days, who is my favourite candidate for the Tory leadership? I've responded by saying, what is your favourite disease? Why would I want any of these people to be in charge of the government? And here is one simple thing about this, whatever other positions you may have. All the people involved were tested, as every member of Parliament was, by the panic over COVID. And all of them panicked. They panicked and they supported plans to crush the liberty of the subject and to destroy the economy with wild inflationary spending. And so they have nothing whatever to say about two of the most fundamental duties of government, and they've proved it. Axiomatically, everybody who stood in that election was unfit to govern the country. So why should I care? As a mischievous joke, which I think is in grave danger of being taken seriously, I would wonder if somebody might start a campaign for a write-in Alexander Pfeffel, Boris Johnson as the third candidate, because the two that have been put before the members are so ludicrous that even he looks good beside them. And people must be beginning to wonder, if this is what they've got, why are they so keen to get rid of him? But that's purely, as I say, mischief. The Conservative Party seems to me to have done itself in here. What we see now is the beginning of Keir Starmer's ascent to Downing Street in some kind of coalition with the Liberal Democrats, probably in less than 2 years. Because if you remember, it's very important, the Tory party were very prominent in saying when Gordon Brown became Prime Minister without winning an election, you haven't got a mandate, you haven't got a mandate. I think this is constitutional rubbish, but it's become common opinion now, and whoever gets the victory in this election will constantly be faced by the opposition saying, well, when are you going to prove yourself by winning a general election? And I don't think they'll last another 2 years. I don't see how they can.
Marianne?
Well, I don't think they would go to an early election, because I think you're right, they probably would lose, whether that's fundamentally because you agree with the principle of they haven't got a mandate, or whether it's because we're going to top 10% of inflation or beyond. We've already seen this cost of living crisis hit families really hard, and it's the summer, no one has their heating on. In the winter, that's going to be much more punishing. What we've had is that over the past 2 years of COVID, households have saved a little bit of money that they otherwise would have spent on luxuries, on those discretionary spends, as economists call them. And now that kind of money's run out and people are going, oh, hang on a minute, we're going to have to cut back. So the first things that you cut back are those luxuries, the luxuries that keep shops and online businesses going. And then people are going to start to really, really tighten their belts.
Oh, very much.
You're standing in the supermarket going, all right, well, I've got 30 quid in my bank account, otherwise my card won't go through. So I'm going to ask the supermarket checkout person to stop putting things through when the total gets to that amount.
This is happening already. The thing about inflation, I remember this from the 1970s, the same thing happened. After a very short period of time, you can't remember the price that anything used to have.
Exactly.
And all the prices become completely impossible to believe. And you look at that wasn't, and it's not 9%. You'll often find something that's put on 20 or 30% in between now and the last time you bought it. And inflation is now moving into that out of control state in which people begin to think, well, if the railwaymen can get a few extra percentage points, then so should I. So all kinds of trouble are coming. And as you say, when it gets cold instead of hot, and people have to pay for the energy that they've got used to having, the amount of discontent which will begin to exist will be huge. And the Tories have timed it brilliantly. They've decided to immolate themselves just at the point when everybody's going to start hating them anyway.
Michelle, had up until, I don't know, a few months ago, thought, well, Rishi's the best of a bad bunch. And then he came out with that spring statement. I thought, you've done nothing. Absolutely nothing. He could have followed through with an economic policy that supported ordinary families, and he did absolutely nothing to kind of fend off the crisis that was coming our way.
There's honestly very little he can do. What he did with the ridiculous magic money tree period was so destructive and so dangerous that it's almost impossible to see anything that he could do now which wouldn't make it worse. So the Liz Truss programme of spending an extra 30 gazillion £1,000. And where will that come from? It would have to be borrowed.
Well,
and
she's
if you
already
borrow
said-
it, then you have to pay it back again at some other later stage. So much of our tax already, if people realise how much of the tax they pay simply goes on paying interest on the debt that we already owe, they'd gasp. And what she proposes to do must lead to more of that. They haven't a clue what to do. Just didn't have a clue what to do when they panicked over COVID.
But Rishi, Marianne, he's actually, because this is one of the things that I couldn't quite grasp with this Tory government. Why aren't you doing more to help the people that really, really need it? But Rishi is obviously very committed to what he was thinking when he was the Chancellor of his economic plan, because he's doubling down on that. He's saying that the other candidates, when there were many of them, he was extending it to most of them. He was saying that they basically live in cuckoo land. They're talking about fairy tales when they're talking about all of these tax cuts. So far from kind of sitting there reflecting and thinking, actually, in hindsight, maybe I could have done more, should have done more, and I will, he's doubling down, saying, no, this is my plan, it's realistic, it's sensible, and on with it we go.
So it's got internal logic, so that is to his credit. Whereas I think Liz Truss, like you say, Peter, and as you pointed out, Michelle, it's a kind of fairy tale that you can't lower taxes and increase spending and support essential services, because we really are, scraping the barrel, all the extra stuff that local authorities could provide, that the NHS was able to prop itself up and get through those gaspingly busy periods. What you've got now is experienced people who are nearing retirement going, this is not worth it, not worth the cost of my family, not worth the cost of my mental health. I'm out. I'm sorry, everyone.
Damage is done.
And the damage is done.
Sunak is being so cautious because he, being the Chancellor of the Exchequer, has seen the books.
He knows the money is not there.
He knows that
exactly.
it's catastrophic. He knows what he did during his own period of fairy tale economics. He knows he destroyed the economy. And now
he didn't single-handedly destroy the economy because of those policies.
It was
the pandemic was
ludicrous.
A global shock.
And I can sit here and say, I said so at the time, all this is going to lead to very, very severe inflation, the destruction of business. And it was obvious, he knew it too, but he still went ahead and did it because rather than listen to any kind of sane advice, the whole government panicked over COVID. We will pay for that till we die.
I absolutely reject that. We may well be paying for it for a very long time, but that's because it was a global pandemic. This was untested territory. We'd never been in a situation where millions of people were at risk of dying, and indeed did. 200,000 people have died in this country alone.
Nor had Sweden been in that position, and they didn't panic, and as a result, they came out of it.
Their economy is different to ours, so it's not.
It is different for us, but it's better run than ours.
But
they make more and export more. But the fact is, they didn't panic, and had they done so, they'd be worse off than they are now, just as we are.
I think what you're suggesting with your 2020 vision is that you would have had.
I said this at the time. I said it all at the time. This is not hindsight.
What you would have
repeating
had,
what I said when it was going on.
Sure. Okay. So it's
and
not
I
hindsight.
got pelted with slime for saying it. So I'm absolutely determined to say it again now. When it's absolutely clear that what I said then was right.
But then what you would have had
right
is
now
that
too.
people would have not been able to keep their rent paid. They wouldn't have had jobs to go back to. Businesses would have collapsed left, right and centre. And so what you would have said is, well, take the pain then and so you don't have pain in the future. That was the rainy day. That's when you have the money printed.
Government policy during COVID destroyed the economy. It destroyed business. It destroyed jobs. And it destroyed what was left of the solvency of this country. And all of it was avoidable, and it didn't need to be done, and they did it. And the problem is that there was also no opposition. So the people who will take over as a result of their catastrophe will be people who are implicated in exactly the same disaster. There's nobody here who has any idea of how bad it was or has any clue as to what to do. And this is the terrifying thing. We've sat through an election, a supposed election of a collection of nobodies who haven't an idea what to do. And if, as I say, if one stops laughing at it, one views it as the tragedy which it undoubtedly is.
Panel, did you want a final word on that one before I bring my viewers in? Because my viewers are very happy today to get involved in this one, I can tell you. Go on.
Two things. Thing number one, which is the thing that I think genuinely was an absolute travesty and an indictment on our government, was the level of corruption, the contracts for mates, the lack of scrutiny of contracts and what was actually being delivered, and the level of fraud that has been written off by the Treasury. That is definitely a black mark in the column for Rishi Sunak. I think the thing that has come up again and again, Michelle, about Boris, even the way that he was treated by his parliamentarians today at Prime Minister's Question Time, we've all somehow managed to forget that he is leaving office in disgrace. He was also at the helm throughout the pandemic. So he can't say, oh, you know, I did a good job, business almost done. Because
we had this.
He was at the helm of this ship that you are condemning, Peter.
We had this moment. I'm not a supporter of his, you should know that. But we had this moment where they were all applauding, which they're not allowed to do, and which always makes me feel faintly ill when they were all applauding him as he left. And I was reminded of that, but of the moment when Blair was also applauded out of the chamber. Now, it still seems to me to be very strange that Blair, a man who was at least partly responsible for one of the worst, stupidest and bloodiest wars in human history, which did nothing but harm, stayed in office and wasn't driven from it. Everybody knows that Blair was responsible for this and that he behaved in an absolutely appalling fashion and sold the country a pack of garbage. And he walked out of office applauded. Johnson, who did something to do with cakes or a glass of wine, is hounded from office as if he committed some terrible war crime, which whatever else he did, he didn't do. And people on the left, particularly, who don't say this about Blair, somehow or other pile on about Johnson as if he's the worst person in the world. I am not a defender of his, but this seems to me to be a wholly out of proportion reaction to the wrongs which he did, given that Blair not merely walked out of Parliament being applauded, uncensured, but then went off to make so much money that he doesn't know what to do with it anymore.